Michael Van Ronkel here for HotCars.com. This morning I picked up this awesome Alfa Romeo GT-V6 Safari build from the Motoring Club in Marina del Rey. Obviously the first thing I had to do was drive straight out to the desert and see what this little thing could do. It was built by Aether Apparel as sort of a rolling advertisement. They call it the Alpine Alfa. They hired Oilstainlab, the twins Nikita and Iliya Bridan, to figure out the overall design, the lift, to render out what it would look like with the accessories, the spare tires on the back, the gas can, and then had Joe Scarbo of Scarbo Performance build up all the suspension components. It's got a 6.5-inch lift, smaller wheels but larger tires, rock sliders, custom bumpers, and it's got all the accessories like the roof rack, the lights. So it seems like it could be pretty legit. But with all these Safari builds popping up online, Porsche 911s being the main culprits, I really wanted to find out whether these things are worth it. Can you take a classic car like this 1985 Alfa and turn it into something that can actually do anything off-road? And what kind of sacrifices are you making in terms of comfort while driving in town? It looks like pure 80s awesomeness, so I wanted to get decked out. Got my Rally Art jacket, my Chuck Taylors, and I even got these super 80s skiing sunglasses with the yellow tent. Let's see how this thing drives, but in the meantime, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out. When you climb in, it's a lot easier than getting into some of the super low, super tiny old classic sports cars. Because of the 6.5-inch lift, you're a lot higher off the ground and you just sort of sit down into the car. That's nice, but you're also losing that low center of gravity that makes those older, super lightweight cars so fun to drive on the road. The interior has a lot more space than I expected for such a tiny little car, but it is sort of that classic size where the keys don't work. First of all, you got 3 different keys for the doors, the gas hatch, and the ignition. But it's the short legs, long arms thing, so I'm in sort of an awkward position, but you get used to that pretty much. It's a 5-speed stick shift, and that's controlling the famous Busso V6 under the hood, which is, so far, driving it out here, a pretty torquey engine, but the throttle is sort of on and off. You're either going or you're not. It's got enough power to move this thing even with all the accessories, which Nikita Bridan told me weigh around 300 to 400 pounds. They had Flying Dutchman Industries create all this stuff for them, and it probably doesn't help with the weight distribution that makes some of these old cars so enticing to begin with. But let's see how it drives. You can hear that Busso engine fire up. The AC actually works. There's a working radio that I can't figure out how to turn off. All the switchboard stuff seems to work, the clock, the oil pressure gauge is pretty much pegged at the max and I don't think it works. And the speedometer, let's call it generous. I think when I'm going 45 it says 55 or more. But, you know, that could have something to do with the wheels and tires, but it's kind of the opposite of what you would expect with larger diameter wheels and tires. Anyways, shifting is pretty good, but the clutch itself only engages about 3/4 to 7/8 of the way off the floor. Let's get rolling. As they explained it to me, the suspension sits at just about full droop, which means there's a lot of compression space left, but if you go on a jump, it's not like the wheels are going to drop by a lot. I find it hard to believe that this car could possibly have a 6.5-inch lift given how little space there is, but I think that's probably attributable somewhat to the wheels and tires. You can hear the steering wheel squeaking like crazy, drives me absolutely nuts. Here we are on a graded road, it's pretty washboarded. You can hear this thing's creaking and rattling, it's pretty bumpy. It's not really worse than a low sports car, but it's not really better. You just know you're not going to bottom out. The ticket is just to go top speed, really, and just full throttle. You'll get a little bit sideways, just fine, and it's pretty fun. You don't have to worry. shoulder here. Going up this hill, the visor's always turning down. Coming up the hill into a little bit of gravel. It's still got grip. It's not terrible. It's really loud and rattly. It sounds like the back end's about to blow up because of the gas cans, but the drive is pretty good. The Busso engine has plenty of power. It likes to rev, but then you shift down into second, and the gearing is so high that now you're just cruising. You don't have that grunt. So really staying in first is where to go. It's pretty fun, I have to admit. Is it safe going along these dirt roads this fast? Probably not. Is it good for the car? I don't know. I think the suspension feels like it's pretty well put together, and I'm not worried about scraping the underside and tearing off the oil pan. And the Alfa Romeo GTV6's transaxle layout gives it pretty good balance, even with the lift. It's like they just sort of ripped off the Lancia V20 design for the whole V6 engine up front, transaxle at the rear, Dedion or Dedion rear tube suspension. It drives pretty well, but the ticket is just to go fast, get up above the washboards, and cruise. When you mash it, you'll get a little sideways. You can lose the rear end and have some opposite steering if you want. But let's see how it drives going up more of like a rocky hill. It doesn't have a limited slip rear differential. It doesn't have a locking rear differential. So this is a real test of what this thing's capable of. I've noticed that it takes bumps better than it takes dips because the suspension has lots of compression left, but not much droop left. This hill's pretty steep and rocky. Let's go up it in first. Take it a little slow. You can hear that suspension. I think it's bottoming out at the bottom and not at the top. It doesn't sound good. But I don't know how much of that is just the car itself creaking and rattling because it's so old, and how much of that is the suspension and chassis actually colliding. I'd say it takes that hill pretty good. You can feel a little bit of slippage from the tires, and it's definitely much better than a car like this would ever be able to take it from the factory. Let's pull out from the dirt onto the highway so you can maybe get a sense of how it drives on the smoother stuff. Second gear doesn't engage too great, but that's just the mechanicals of the drivetrain. The Busso engine sounds great, and it's got lots of power, as you can see, but for the suspension you can feel just about every crack and bump in the road. I was honestly expecting it to be a lot softer so that it would absorb all those bumps, especially while off-roading. The thing shines while off-roading, to be true, and that's what it should do, even though it's loud and sounds like the whole back hatch is about to break off. But coming into some corners, it's got a good amount of understeer. I don't think it has power steering, and the steering wheel's pretty small, but it's got good steering feel. The problem is that we're just too high up and the suspension is almost too taut. So you can't really go into these corners with a lot of speed because you feel like you're leaning over, even though maybe you're not. Yeah, a lot of understeer. You can forget heel towing because the accelerator pedal is higher up than the brake pedal. Let's get some speed back up in here. You can feel what the Alfa might once have had. Of course, we've got those big high sidewall tires too, which probably doesn't help. But the Busso engine's got, you know, enough respectable power, and it sounds great. Shifting into third is pretty nice. The speedometer says we're going 60, but I think we're going about 55. I don't know what that's about. But listen to that engine. I'm flooring it, and we've lost all the power at the upper end. It's a torquey engine, it's not a it drives really pretty well considering everything that's been done to it. And that's the amazing part, because you're gonna drive this thing in town 99% of the time, let's be honest. You're not gonna be out off-roading all the time in your Safari build. So, yeah, you've made sacrifices. You don't have to worry about speed bumps or steep driveways anymore. But is the ride quality better or worse? I don't really know 100%. I suspect it's actually a little worse. Maybe the Safari build could be somewhere in the middle, but this one has to look really cool because it's a piece of rolling advertisement. Next up, I want to drive it in town just to see what it's like sort of living with it. I've got it for another day, so I'm going to do some driving around LA in traffic and see if I like it. Driving it in town, the blind spots are horrendous, the suspension's really taut, it makes a racket, the AC works okay. When you're in the canyons, you're a little too high. The suspension is taut, but it's not quite as low and lightweight as you would want, especially with all the bumpers and skid plates and wheels and tires and gas cans. I'd be more interested in driving a stock one of these things to see how it handles with the transaxle layout, but converting that torsion bar front end to coilovers, lifting the rear end with a Dedion or Dedion rear tube suspension system, it's all very cool. Right now I'm pulling into the motoring club here in Marina del Rey. It's been a fun few days. I got to drive this thing in the dirt. As you can see, it's filthy. Drove it around town, drove it on the freeway, drove it in the canyons. So what do I think about this whole Safari craze? Well, on one hand, it's super impressive that the Oilstainlab guys and Joe Scarbo, Scarbo Performance, and Jake at Flying Dutchman LLC were able to create a classic 80s sports car that can go off-roading and you don't have to worry about it. All the goodies like the rock sliders, the roof rack, the wheels and tires, they do add a lot of weight. And I think the rest of the design could use a little bit of tightening up to match the impressiveness of the suspension. The steering wheel squeaks, the clutch is a little iffy, and so is getting into second. And the truth of the matter is now you've got a classic Italian sports car that can do some canyon fun and go off-roading, but it doesn't do either thing particularly well. I still believe you should have one car for each purpose, so I'll keep my 1998 Mitsubishi Montero for off-roading and hopefully get my Porsche 914 running for the smooth roads in the canyons, the low, tight, lightweight sports car experience. If there's anything the Alpine Alfa is good at, it's turning heads. You can't argue with the style, with the lifted stance, the rally lights, the roof rack, the sort of Integrale inspired rear wing built into the roof rack. It's awesome. I've never driven any car ever before that attracted as much attention as this one in LA, where everyone is super spoiled for choice when it comes to incredible cars. And we have to remember that this is, after all, a marketing exercise by Aether Apparel. It's gonna go live in their store on La Brea and sell clothes. If I did want to have just one car, maybe I would consider a rally build. I'm not 100% sold though. I am interested to drive other ones. Let's call my interest peaked. For now, it's time to take these shades off, get back to reality. Big thanks to Aether Apparel, Davide, for letting me drive this Alpine Alfa and take it off-roading. Big thanks to Nikita Bridan of Oilstainlab for walking me through the whole build process. And thank you for watching. Please, before you sign off, once again, like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us make great content like this with great cars like this. Thanks.